Invictus Communications Incorporated is proud to present nationally renowned motivational speaker Art Berg. Entertaining and motivating audiences around the world, Art has spoken to hundreds of organizations such as IBM, Coca-Cola, EduQuest, Young President's Organization, WordPerfect, Novell, ERA, KeyCorp, TCI Cablevision, U.S. West Communications, The Sealing Doctor, Citizens Against Crime, and Brigham Young University. Stephen R. Covey, author of the nationally best-selling book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says art is truly inspirational, highly motivating. Art walks our talk. Listen to what others have said. A great presentation by a great presenter. Your speech was right on target to the challenges we face. Art delivered everything we expected and more. After becoming a quadriplegic as the result of a serious automobile accident, Art has won several national sales awards, has been named the Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the Small Business Administration, is a published author of the regionally best-selling book Some Miracles Take Time, and is a distinguished professional speaker. Art is married to Dallas Howard, Mrs. Utah, USA, 1992, and they have a daughter named Mackenzie. Art enjoys a variety of sports, which include scuba diving, parasailing, rugby, and wheelchair racing. Join with us now as Art presents his most popular inspirational message before an enthusiastic audience, entitled, The Impossible Takes Longer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I realize that some of you who perhaps are in the back are having a difficult time seeing me. That's all right. I can't see you either. Now, I was visiting with Joe Charbonneau just the other day as we were discussing our opportunity to speak from this platform. We were discussing our being a little bit nervous, perhaps more than usual, at the weight of the responsibility speaking from this platform. And I told Joe that really I had only one advantage. My knees don't shake. And he's not much taller than I am. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. You know, I understand that change is not an easy thing. And we're living in an era of unprecedented change, where things are changing so rapidly around us, it's difficult to even keep up within our industry and outside of our industry. And I understand it's not easy. Oftentimes change requires that we risk ourselves, that we do new things that perhaps even make us uncomfortable. I was vacationing with my family a few years ago in Hawaii. And while I was vacationing with them there, my family invited me to learn how to scuba dive. Now, I had never enjoyed that experience before. And I was pretty sure I didn't want to enjoy it then. But my brothers said that they were going to throw me in the ocean anyways, and they just thought a little oxygen would be nice. And so I agreed. So I went through all the safety instruction, the training, the education, all to learn how to dive. Finally, the time came to dive in the ocean, so I put my wetsuit on, the air tanks on my back, the buoyancy compensator vest, the weight belt around my waist. They put the little flippers on my feet, and I'm not sure why they put the little flippers on my feet, but they said it looked right. As they were dragging me into the water, I overheard one of my brothers say that I looked like shark bait. And I was getting a better idea for why I had been invited. Now, for those of you who may have scuba dived before, you know you wear a buoyancy compensator vest. Now, you can let air in or out of that jacket, and it allows you to rise or to fall in the water. Now, my jacket was full, and so I was floating on the surface, looking to the ocean floor. I was very happy and extremely comfortable. But the instructor had a whole new vision for my future. And so he came up and he let all the air out of my jacket. And so I began to descend in the water. Now there was only one problem though with my descension. With the flippers on my feet were tending to float more than my head. Now my wife says she has a theory for that. But I don't believe her. I went straight down to the bottom, 50 feet. I hit my head on the bottom of the ocean floor. My flippers were sticking straight up in the air. I mean, fish were looking at me strange. The instructor, who was eager to help, he came down and he let all the air back into my jacket. Now, I don't know what he thought I was going to do, but I went straight back up again. Feet first. I passed my family on the way, and my feet surfaced kind of like the Hunt from Red October. Now my feet were bobbing above the surface, my head still pointed to the ocean floor. The instructor must have been a CSP. Thought if he took the weight belt off of my waist, and if he put it around my knees, that perhaps I would float flatter in the water. He was a brilliant man. And it would have worked too, if it hadn't slipped down around my ankles. Well, now I sank back down to the bottom, and now I was standing on the bottom of the ocean. And I would just kind of wave there like kelp. Now my family, they were compassionate. From time to time, they would return. And they'd pick me up off of my rock, and they stuck me on a new one. Pretty sure they were using me as some kind of a marker. I believe that as professional speakers, God intends that you and I are to be markers. That we are to set an example that others can follow, to be a voice of hope in a hopeless world. I believe that it is intended that you and I are to be markers, to risk ourselves in new ways, to do new things, to be at the forefront in the process of change. I know a lot of things about change, but none more than this, that for those in this life who refuse to change, life will change for you, and it is always a more painful experience. It's about 12 years ago, I felt good about my life and where I was going and what I was doing. I was active physically. I was a competitive water skier, a snow skier. I played golf, tennis, racquetball, basketball. I bowled on a league, and I ran nearly every day. I just started my own brand new tennis court construction company, and so my financial future looked rewarding and bright. And I was engaged to the most beautiful girl in the world. Happier than I'd ever been before in my life. And then a tragedy occurred, or at least some called it that. I'm going to share a part of that experience here with you today, and then I want you to judge. You tell me. You tell me if it was a tragedy, or whether it was perhaps one of the greatest experiences of my life. You tell me if it was a disaster, as some called it, or whether it was perhaps one of the most significant opportunities I might ever enjoy. See, it was a beautiful Christmas day. I just spent at home with my family. That evening I was going to leave from my home in California to drive back to the state of Utah to spend the rest of the holidays with Dallas, my fiance, and her family, and to finish our upcoming wedding plans, which was to be in 5 short weeks. Beautiful Christmas day in 1983. Just enjoyed the day home with my family. That evening I was going to leave with a friend of mine named John. I said my goodbyes to my family, went out to a little car with my friend John, who, by the way, is still a very dear friend of mine. We climbed into a little car and we drove away into the night. Now, I drove for the first 8.5 hours of the trip. And then, being somewhat tired, and John having rested during that time, I climbed from the driver's seat into the passenger's, fastened my seatbelt, and then John pulled away into the dark. Now, John drove for about another hour or an hour and a half. And then he too, being somewhat tired, he fell asleep. Now, I don't remember much of what happened that night. But what I do remember, I'll share with you. I felt the car jerk to one side. And so I sat up and I asked John if everything was all right. Before he had time to respond, the car hit a cement divider. It went up and over the top of it, and then it rolled down the side of the road a number of times. The car finally came to a stop in a pile of twisted metal and broken glass. John quickly turned to his right to see if I was okay. But I wasn't there. Quickly, he pulled himself through the broken window and he called my name in the dark. It was 4:30 in the morning. We were 40 miles north of Las Vegas on I-15, and it was cold outside. John called my name again, and still there was no response. So finally, on hands and knees, John groped and searched his way through the dark, feeling his way along, trying to find his friend. And then he heard me groan, and so he rushed to my side. My face was covered with blood, almost beyond recognition. He pulled his leather jacket from off his shoulders and he laid it across my broken body, and then he asked, "Are you all right?" I told him I didn't think so. I told him I couldn't feel my legs and I couldn't move my hands. And in that moment, I wondered where all my dreams had gone. And then I drifted back into unconsciousness. In the last 12 years, as I have had an opportunity to travel throughout the world and to share a message which is somewhat personal in nature, I've often had many others come to me and want to share with me some of their own personal experiences of frustration, struggle, tragedy, and pain. And often as they have, they've prefaced their own experience by this remark, by saying, "You know, Art, my experiences were nothing like yours," meaning they weren't as difficult, as frightening, or as painful. To that I take some issue. See, if I have learned anything in the last 12 years, I have learned this, that pain hurts in any form. See, my pain is no greater than for that of the mother who's lost a wayward son to the influences of alcohol and drugs. My fear is no greater than for that of the professional speaker who might be having a difficult time in financially supporting their family. And my tears are no wetter than for that of the individual who bought IBM stock 3 years ago or who's lost faith in their hopes and dreams and wonders what tomorrow will bring. See, you and I, as we come here to this workshop today, all of us come with our own fears, the things that cause us to hesitate, to pause. It may be a variety of things. Perhaps some of us are coming here today because we're looking into March and April and the calendar's looking awful empty. You know, some of us here are afraid. We're afraid because we don't want to leave what we have in order to explore something which is new. Others of us perhaps we're afraid that the audience won't respond the way we want them to. We all have our own fears, whatever those are. And that fear tends to paralyze us. Now, I would suspect that there may be none of you here today who at one time in your life will have a broken neck and be laying on a ditch on the side of a road, paralyzed from the chest down. I suspect that won't happen, although it'll make a good story. But we all have the fears that we have to face every day, which tend to paralyze us from moving forward. And so what do? I'd like to share with you a principle, a truth, that saved this young man's life. My mother came to my side and she whispered this truth in my ear when she said, "Art, while the difficult takes time, the impossible just takes a little longer." And suddenly a once darkened room began to fill with the light of hope and faith that tomorrow would be better. In order for you to understand the power of that idea in my life, and perhaps even in your own, you need to come back with it more than 12 years ago. 12 years ago when I broke my neck on a desert floor. 12 years ago when I was taken by ambulance to a hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada, and there I was pronounced a quadriplegic. Now, I could already even pronounce the word, let alone spell it, and I still can't spell it. I had become paralyzed from the chest down. I lost use of my feet and legs. I lost use of my stomach muscles, 2 out of my 3 major chest muscles. I lost use of my right tricep, most of the strength and the use in my shoulders and arms, and I lost the complete use of my hands. And that was where my new life was to begin. And the doctor said I'd have to dream new dreams and think new thoughts. They said that I would never work again. Although I was pretty excited about that one. They said that 93% of those in my physical condition would never return to work. They said I'd never drive again, that for the rest of my life I'd be dependent upon family and friends to eat, to get dressed, or even to get from place to place. They said I shouldn't expect to go many places or to do many things. They said I should never expect to get married because who would want me? And they said that never again in my young life would I ever be able to compete in any type of athletic event or competitive activity. And for the first time in my young life, I was really afraid. I was afraid that what they said might really be true. See, at the time, if I leaned forward even more than an inch or two, I didn't have the strength to push my body back up again. And so I had to begin to relearn how to do everything in my life. I remember spending hour after hour stacking little blocks on top of one another, trying to learn how to use my hands the way they were again. Joe, it really wouldn't have been so bad if the little blocks didn't have ducks and lambs on the sides of them. And the letters A, B, and C. I remember on one particular morning they were going to teach me how to eat breakfast again. Now I know it doesn't sound like such a difficult thing. Chewing the food was not the problem. It was getting the food from the plate to my mouth that presented the opportunity. And so I sat before my challenge of powdered eggs and day-old muffins. And they really expected me to get better. I had a therapist at my side to help me. And so I had 2 requests of the therapist that morning. The first request I had was that I wanted to eat breakfast by myself. She said, I don't know if that's such a bright idea, Art. I said, that's all right. Not a very bright person. And so she agreed. She said, I give you 30 minutes in which you eat breakfast by yourself. I said, thank you. Now my second request, though, was somewhat more unusual. You see, at the time, I was wearing what they call the halo. Now my mother will attest to the fact that it was not the angelic type. It is a breastplate which are on the front and on your back. Metal bars going open over your shoulders and up the side of your head, with a metal plate which goes around the circumference of your head. Then they bolt it into your skull in 4 different places. That keeps the head from gnawing to the front and the back, or the left and the right. Also keeps you from getting a date. But it gives the neck the time it needs to heal. Now I know it sounds kind of gruesome. And actually, they really are. But I think many audience members ought to own one. See, then when you're speaking after that, the 2-hour open bar and the dinner, and you're starting at 10 o'clock at night, they can get some real quality sleep without nodding off all the time. Well, I wore one of those for the next 12 weeks of my life. Without the use of my stomach muscles, it tends to make you a little bit top heavy. So I wore a seatbelt across my chest to prevent me from falling forward. Now that was my second request. I asked if she'd remove the chest strap. Reluctantly, she agreed. And upon removing it, she left, promising to return in 30 minutes. I reached forward and I picked up my fork from off the table. Now my balance wasn't very good. But I knew from the fast approaching plate of food that I was falling. So now with my face in my plate, and without the strength to lift myself, my own pitiful circumstances, I had a new perspective on the 4 basic food groups. Do you know I noticed things in my eggs which I had never noticed before? Well, after I secured ample breathing room somewhere between the eggs and the biscuits, I thought 2 things to myself. The first thing I thought was, you know, this may very well be the longest 30 minutes of my life. The second thing I thought was, you know, I really may not be in this good of a position in a long time. And so I ate my breakfast. 30 minutes later, the therapist returned. Surprised to see me with my face in my plate, she quickly rushed to my side and pulled me from my circumstances. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "You bet. You know, the nose hurts just a little bit. But I'm all right." She said, "Well, how'd you do?" Plate was clean. It was very clean. I said, "I did just great. Little tough, though, getting the butter on the biscuit." You know, it wasn't long after that when the doctors and nurses dragged me to a separate room. They said, "Art, there are different terrains in life." I said, "No kidding." They said, "You got hills and concrete, gravel, carpet, padding underneath of carpet." They said, "Art, because of the strength that you'll never have, in order for you to be able to grant it all in life, we need to order you an electric wheelchair." I know it sounds like a lot of fun. But I was 21 years old at the time, and I learned how to ask the truly important questions in life. And so I asked, I said, "Can you tell me, what color do electric wheelchairs come in?" They thought for a moment, and they said, "Chrome." I didn't have a lot that was chrome in my wardrobe, and so I said, "Can you tell me what color the manual wheelchairs come in?" They said, "Oh, purple and red and yellow and green and black and blue." I said, I'd like to have one of those. "Thank you." And there are many other reasons besides color. They said, "I'll tell you what, Art, we have an inside track in our hospital which is 1/8 of a mile long, and it's all linoleum." They said, "Art, if you can push around that track in less than 30 minutes, we'll let you have a manual wheelchair." I thought, what a democracy. Isn't it great to live in America? And so I agreed. The morning the event arrived, doctors and nurses all stood around, anxious to see if I would finish. Stopwatch in hand to mark my progress. Piece of tape across the floor that marked the starting and the finish line. And then they clicked the watch and they said, "Go." Well, they might as well not have said anything. Took me about 5 minutes just to get across the line. It was very thick tape. But once I got over that first speed bump and had momentum on my side, I felt good and strong and confident. I thought I could conquer the world. I have to admit, though, it was a little embarrassing when the old man in the walker passed me. That's all right. I caught up with him later and knocked it out from under him. In California, they call that therapy. Well, I got down to the end of that first hallway and I thought I'd taken a wrong turn as my arms and shoulders began to tire, and I wondered if I'd ever finish. Went down the second hallway and the third and finally the last. Cross over that line just one more time in exactly 28 minutes. And so I got my manual wheelchair. But you know, it wasn't long after that when I wondered if I had made such a good decision in my life. It's that time of the year when I wanted to go shopping by myself. So you have to understand that my being in a wheelchair, Dallas, my wife, likes to use me as a shopping cart. And while it may be convenient, it's not always fun. Wasn't so bad until she started bringing me back to the return cart rack. I had to pay it $0.25 just to get myself back out again. So I went shopping in a mall in San Jose called Eastridge Mall. 3 stories high, more than 200 stores, a shopper's dream. I was on the 3rd level, the 3rd back down to the 2nd. Now, I couldn't find the elevator. So if you can visualize with me for just a moment. They have these long sloping ramps, which go from one level all the way down to the next. Just as I sat at the top of that great abyss, and I looked down into the valley below, I was so sure, so confident that I could manage that kind of a fall that I waited for everybody else to get off the ramp. And then I pushed off. Joe, I noticed an interesting thing happened when I pushed off. I accelerated. And I started to go faster and faster. Now, I still have absolutely no use of my hands, so I can only put outside pressure on the rings. I put more and more pressure on the rings, but I kept going faster and faster. I put more and more pressure on the rings, and I kept going faster and faster. About that time, I had a revelation. I realized for the first time in my life what my high school physics teacher had been trying to teach me when she said that when you couple the law of gravity with the law of momentum, you get freeway speeds. At that time, I began to smell burning flesh coming from my hands, and so I knew I was in trouble. Being the good Boy Scout that I was obviously more concerned for the safety of young mothers and their children at the bottom of the ramp than I would be for myself. I mean, after all, what more can you do to hurt a quadriplegic? What am I going to do, break my neck? Oh no! So I began to wave my arms. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Mothers ran to the right, children ran to the left. Do you know, I noticed an interesting thing happened when I went like this. I accelerated. Now, I don't know how fast I was going. 80. 90 miles an hour. So I raced right down the middle of all those good folks, and I'm a lucky man. There was a store in front of me. And the name across the front of the store was A. Hirsch & Son Jewelers. I know, I should have thought of that too. Well, I don't know how many of you ever heard of a bull in a china shop. But this bull was doing 100 miles an hour. And I had the feeling I was about to become a part of their layaway program. Well, I raced right down to the middle of that store and I continued to wave my arms. Get out of the way! Salesmen were jumping over counters. Customers hid behind pedestals. They thought they were safe. Nobody was safe. But the man who really looked worried was the man in the very back. He was the man behind the repair counter. He was in the line, all there was. His eyes are about as big as saucers, getting bigger. But you know, he had the look on his face like he knew we were going to get acquainted. Well, I'm a lucky man. There was carpet on the floor with thick padding underneath. So I began to slow down, and I came to a stop right in front of the repair counter. Now I know what some of you are thinking. I can see it in your eyes. Some of you actually wished I'd hit the repair counter, just so I'd have a better story. Well, I didn't. Now the repairman, he looked down on the top of the counter and he said, "Can I help you?" You know, there are about 100 folks behind me that are wondering the same thing. I said, "Yes, sir. Can you tell me what time it is? I'm in an awful hurry." What's ironic is that I believe that sometimes you and I miss some of the greatest miracles of life simply because we are always in a hurry. If I've learned anything about this business, I've learned this, that it takes time. And I am discouraged when I see so many that come into our organization and I don't see it next year. Because sometimes I think we get the idea that we can build it so quickly, hang the shingle and the phone will ring. It doesn't work that way. It hasn't worked for me, and I haven't met someone that it's worked that way for yet. The great realization that's taken me years to discover is that this business takes time. I decided to go back to that same hospital about 1.5 years after I left it. Decided to try that indoor track just one more time. The one that had previously taken me 28 minutes. This time there were no doctors or nurses. There was no stopwatch. Only the second hand my watch. The piece of tape was still on the floor, cracked and yellowing. And then I took off. In exactly 1 minute and 58 seconds later, I crossed the line again. Now, some people wouldn't call that a miracle, but I do. And for the first time in my young life, I learned that dreams are never destroyed by circumstances. Dreams are born in the heart and in the mind, and only there can they ever die. Since that day, I now own and operate my own business. Published author, professional speaker. Learned how to drive again. Dangerous thing for a quadriplegic. It's all right. I've only injured a few. I go where I want to go. I do what I want to do. I'm completely independent. I take care of myself. And I return to the world of sports. See, there are reasons why those many years ago they said that I'd never again be able to participate in any type of athletic event or competitive activity. Just as there are those who will tell you why you can't live your dreams today. You see, aside from the obvious limits of my body no longer sweats anymore. Now, I know it sounds like a modern miracle to some of you, especially Freddie. But I probably saved $1 million in deodorant, and I do have significantly more friends. It has its disadvantage as well. So when the body no longer sweats anymore, it doesn't know how to cool off. So when you take what's little left of the body, if you push it too long or if you push it too hard, if outside temperatures are too high, the inside temperature begins to rise, and as it does, the head begins to get light. The breathing becomes labored and heavy. The muscles begin to fatigue very quickly, and then you know that those are the first signs of heat stroke. And if you don't curtail your activities soon, sometimes it can even prove to be fatal. For 3 years, I trained for a race which would be longer than any race I'd ever begun. For 3 years, I trained for a race that would be longer than any race any quadriplegic at my level of ability had ever attempted. I trained for a race which was 325 miles long. It would take me 7 days to complete it, if I could complete it. On July 2nd of 1993, I began that race in downtown Salt Lake City in the direction of southern Utah. By the third day, and more than 135 miles, my hands were so bloodied and so swollen that they had to cut the gloves off my hands. And the doctors asked that I stop before I did permanent damage to my hands and to my body. I kept thinking, you know, it's got to get easier in this. It can't get any harder. And then for the next day, I had headwinds of 15 and 20 miles an hour. And I had to push, even going downhill. I kept thinking, you know, it's got to get easier in this. It can't get any harder. And then for the next 3 days, it was more than 105 degrees. And I raced on a freshly oiled road, which was jet black. And I baked in the heat. I kept thinking, turn me over. It's got to get easier than this. And on the final day, with police escorts on the front and on the rear, I rode those final miles into St. George. Traffic signals stopped, people lined the streets. And then I knew that what my mother said was true. While the difficult takes time, the impossible just takes a little longer. Thank you very much.